the base angles of an isosceles triangle are congruent, but first you might wonder what are base angles. And we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to look at how to identify them given different circumstances, and then just some basic examples. So the first thing we want to do is just draw a triangle, and what makes a triangle isosceles is when two sides are congruent. To show the congruence, we're going to put these little ticks on them. So any side with a tick means that anything else with a tick has the same length. So if these two triangles, if these two sides have the same length, then the base angles are the angles on the bottom. So those angles are congruent. One way to identify the bottom of the triangle is that they are opposite the congruent sides. Now, if that confuses you, that's okay. That's not my favorite way of looking at it either. And I'm saying bottom. Let's change our word to base. And to be quite fair, there is no bottom of a triangle. There's also no top of a triangle, because I could have easily drawn this triangle looking like that, right? And then, like, where's the top? Where's the bottom? So we don't describe a triangle like that, an isosceles triangle especially. So one thing I like to do is I like to highlight the sides, the congruent sides. So this one has a tick, so I'm highlighting that side. Which other side is congruent to that side? Well, this one over here, because we put that tick on it. Now, where those two sides meet, I like to think of the top. I like to think of that point as a top, but there's another word that we use, and it's called the vertex. So we are going to refer to this angle on the top over here as the vertex angle, and the other two angles as the base angles. So once you identify the vertex angle, you could easily call the third side the base, and the angles touching that line would be the base angles. All right, but the proper way to do this is to identify the angle across from the side. So the angle across from that side is this angle. The angle across from this side is this angle. So since those two sides are congruent, the angles across from them are also congruent. All right, let me test you on this real quick. So let's see. I'm going to draw a bunch of triangles. I'm going to try to make them look all isosceles in some way. Let's do one that looks like this. And you know what? I'm going to make one that looks almost equilateral. All right, and I'm going to say that these two are the congruent sides. For this one, these two are the congruent sides. And let's draw one that looks a little bit like that. Right, and I'm going to say this side is congruent to that side. So for the first triangle, what side is the base? Keep your eye on the two lines that are congruent. So that's the vertex. This side here is the base, meaning these two angles are congruent. Let's take a look at the next one. So where's the base? Hopefully you could see that this is the base. So these are the two base angles. Where's the base for this one? It's right over here. So that means these two angles are congruent. And now I'm not even going to ask you about the base. Just tell me which angles are congruent. And well, you have to identify in your mind that this side is the base. So now these two angles are the congruent angles. All right, so let's take a look at some small examples. So if you had to find, if you're given an isosceles triangle like this, and you had to find out, let's say they told you this angle was 30 degrees, right? Let's use a nicer number, like 40. I guess 30 was okay too. And they want you to find out this angle. Now, how do you find that out? Well, you know that, well, I'm assuming that you know the angles in a triangle always sum to 180. And since this is an isosceles triangle, and this is the base, so this is the other base angle, right? Those two must be the same. Instead of putting a question mark, I could just label it as x, right? And we know that all three angles must add up to 180. So we could say 40, which is that top angle, plus this angle over here, plus this angle over there. When we add all three up, it must add up to 180. All right, so this is just an algebraic equation. Maybe that will click with some of you. And we could solve that, and you'll get 40 plus 2x is equal to 180, minus the 40 on both sides, and you get 2x is equal to 70. Not 70, 140. I'm getting ahead of myself there. Now divide by 2 on both sides, and you get 70. So each of those angles is 70. You didn't have to use the equation for such a simple problem, because if these two angles are congruent, meaning that they're the same measurement, if we minus the 40 from the 180, we'll get 140. Now split the 140 in two, because it must be shared amongst these two angles, and you'll get 70. Right? So we did it algebraically, and we did it mentally over here. Let's take a look at something else. Let's do one more like this and one more that's a little bit different. So let's make this triangle a little bit weirder. All right, if you're given this triangle only, you can't do anything with it. I'm going to say this side is congruent to that side, and let's say this angle up here, just to keep it easy, that angle up there is 80. Well, how much is this angle out here? Well, there are a number of ways to do this, but let's just stick to the main point I'm trying to create here. If this is 80, and the sum of the angles in the triangle must be 180, then that 80 subtracted away from this 180 is 100, but these two angles are congruent, so the 100 must be split between those, so that means each one of these is 50. And if that's 50, well, two angles that form a straight angle must add up to 180, so this angle over here is 180 minus 50, which is 130. All right, this is really the goal, to just get to understand that the base angles are congruent. Let's do one more. And this one, it's going to be a little bit different. So let's see. Let's look at this triangle. If I said this side is congruent to that side, and I told you that, let's say, I don't know, this angle out here is 100 degrees. Right, again, just to keep it easy. Now, this is an isosceles triangle. You have to identify it, right? Usually, you will not be told anything else, but those two sides are congruent. But once you know that it's isosceles, then identify the base, this angle, and that angle must be congruent, because that is a property of an isosceles triangle. So if this is 100, this must be 80 over here, because these two angles must add up to 180. And if this is 80, then this also must be 80 there. And if those two angles are 80, but the three angles in the triangle sum to 180, well, 80 and 80 is 160, subtracted from that 180, and we're left with 20. All right, I totally forgot to point out that we were trying to find this one. But that's the idea. And obviously, I drew these by hand. Those angles do not look like what they are. But hopefully, you get the point. And yeah, see you on the next one.